In his most recent video, The Real Threat from Islam, Thunderfoot presents us with an argument about Islam, followed by a question. I wish to address the issue and indeed answer Thunderfoot's question, and I'd like to do so in three parts. Firstly, I want to address the four observations that Thunderfoot makes. Secondly, I want to ask why the Islamic world produces less scientific papers than might be expected by its population. Thirdly, I want to consider what Islam is, and I will then move to answer the question. I want to make two brief points first. Point A, this is not the answer. I don't think the answer exists, and if it does, I don't know what it is. There will be mistakes, errors and inaccuracies in this video, and I'd appreciate your help in spotting them. Point B, in my past two videos, in the comment sections, accusations of racism and bigotry have been levelled against Thunderfoot. I would like to make it clear that although I have very major reservations about the positions advocated by Thunderfoot, I do not believe he is a racist or a bigot, nor is Thunderfoot unresponsive to argument. I believe I detect a change in his argument from his earlier positions. It's subtle but important. He's shifted from Islam is antithetical to Islam as currently practiced. Anyway, on with the show. Thunderfoot makes four observations and supports them in part by referencing an article by Jim Al-Khalili. I shall address the observations in turn. Observation 1. Civilization is a monument to science. It influences every aspect of your life. Indeed, it's the causal agent that has on average tripled your life expectancy. No. Civilization is not a monument to science. Science is a monument to civilization. I can make that argument with all the strength that you yours. More seriously, it's an iterative process. Science, culture, other features work together and grow together to build what we call civilization. I have previously criticised Thunderfoot for essentially scientism, but I will sum up my argument there by quoting Emma Goldman. A revolution without dancing is not a revolution worth having. Observation 2. That knowledge is gained by scientists performing research and publishing their work for other scientists to scrutinise. Publications are a way by which we can measure the growth of knowledge. Well, I grant that, but I would say that we need to look as well at the need for a receptive zeitgeist. And I would say that you cannot use the measure of numbers of scientific papers published as a proxy for civilization or barbarity. Observation 3. About 1/5 of the world's population are Islamic. That's about 1.5 billion people. It's a large number, and we should consider the diversity that implies. And we should recognise that Islamic or Muslim is a very broad definition. Observation 4. The entire Islamic world only produces about 1% of the world's scientific papers. Indeed, back in 2005, the entire Arab world had a smaller research footprint than Harvard. It really doesn't matter if you subdivide the Muslims into moderates or extremists. Islam as a whole, as is practiced now, and has been practiced for the best part of the last 800 years, is the kiss of death for the very wellspring that made modern civilization flourish. Well, I don't contest the statistics. I'm sure the research done by Professor Al-Khalili that Thunderfoot cites is correct. I do have a problem with this 800 years thing, but I'll leave that aside. What I find stunning is that Thunderfoot has confounded correlation with causation, has not looked for other factors that might affect it, and has gone ahead and assumed a monocausal relationship. If nothing else, that's bad science. I'd like to broaden the scope of the question by considering other factors at play, by considering the question, why does the Islamic world produce less scientific research than one might expect, given its population? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the definition of the Islamic world is problematic because the Islamic world is clearly not limited to the Arab Street or majority Muslim countries. Indeed, Jim al-Khalili is part of the Islamic world. Those are all connected in some way. But for the purposes of this section, I'm going to go ahead and define the Islamic world as states with a population that is more than 50% Muslim. The path to becoming a modern, industrialised society, that is to say, one with the financial and cultural wherewithal to support a research base, is for a developing country different to the first countries to industrialise, principally because there are already industrialised countries with which to compete. This is the idea of path dependency, and that has several sub-effects. There's the cultural dominance of the West. In many academic fields, the lingua franca is English. The USA dominates the academic world to such an extent that UK government ministers have said that they see brain drain from the UK to the US as a problem. Rentier States. Either by accident or design, many states in the Islamic world, those centred on the Persian Gulf, have become rentier states. These states export a resource, here oil, for money and so do not build up a tax system. Building up a tax system has historically been one of the reasons for desiring greater access to politics. No taxation without representation. Moreover, skills can be simply bought from outside. A ruling class can develop that has no need for its citizenry other than to keep quiet, and it can bribe them to do that. That effect can cascade across a whole region. Economics. The West has repeatedly interfered, and often for the worse, in majority Muslim countries. From the toppling of Mossadegh to backing both sides in the Iran-Iraq war, the West has, for various reasons, made a great many people at least circumspect about its actions. Empire. Many of the countries under discussion were parts of European empires. They retain in many cases outdated bureaucratic models, and in more than a few cases their very boundaries were literally drawn on a map by a civil servant in a far-off capital. All of the above have an effect on developing universities and civil society. It kills it off. Finally, culture. Culture matters. All of the things I've mentioned above have cultural impacts. Now, religion has a cultural impact as well, but it can be negative or positive. Indigenous culture has an impact, and all of those factors interplay. We see similar effects outside the Islamic world. Why, on the list of top 10 countries for producing scientific papers from 1996 to 2006, and on most cited papers for the same period, is there not a single entry from Africa or South America? Where are Russia and China? Now, these are just sketches of a few of the factors at work. It's not an exhaustive list. So, as much as we must ask why the Islamic world produces less scientific papers than might be expected, we must ask why the USA produces more scientific papers than might be expected from its population. Well, I would say that the reason why the Islamic world produces less scientific papers than one might expect is, at least in part, a constellation of political, historical, economic and social factors that do not just affect the Islamic world. The conclusion of Thunderfoot's argument is, quote, "Given such data, it seems clear that Islam, as it is currently practiced, is detrimental to modern civilization. Obviously, the world will be a better place in 50 years if this anti-science attribute of the religion is diminished or the number of people practicing the religion is diminished." End quote. What is Islam? Obviously, it's a religion, but it's more than that. It's a religion, and it's an imagined community, something akin to a nation, and a cluster of smaller, real communities. That means you're not just dealing with a philosophy. You have to consider the social psychology at macro and micro levels of what's going on. Everything from how information is communicated, to forming kinship groups, in-groups and out-groups. You have to consider the effects of media, politics, culture, money, environment, geography, and everything else that affects the species we know as Homo sapiens. How is Islam currently practiced? The only possible answer to that is variously. There is as much variety amongst the 1.5 billion Muslims as just about any other group of humans that contains 1.5 billion that you care to choose. There's also the issue here, which is instructive, that it's not just an Islamic community, it's the community of Muslims, because there are non-religious Muslims out there. You don't need many. It simply shows that Islam has, or being a member of the community, has a cultural weight as well. You can't look at it in isolation, and for the reasons I've set out, you shouldn't. I would tend to say then that the question is not so much how do we stop forms of Islam that are antithetical to science, but what are the forces at work that cause people to adopt forms of Islam that are antithetical to science? Those are two quite different questions. Nor, though, can we deny that the Islamic world is behind in terms of science. So the question is, as Thunderfoot puts it, quote, what do you think is the best way to effect such a goal? End quote. I have attempted to show that the premise of Thunderfoot's question is flawed. It is not Islam per se that is the problem, but a constellation of factors, only a few of which can be attributed to religion. Let us answer Thunderfoot's question directly by quoting from the same paper by Professor Jim Al-Khalili that Thunderfoot cited. Quote, "It is crucial that both Muslims and non-Muslims are reminded of a time when Islam and science were not at odds, albeit in a very different world. This is important not only for science to flourish once again in the Islamic world, but also as one of the many routes towards a future in which Muslims see the value of curiosity-driven scientific research, just as they did 1,000 years ago." End quote. And later in the same article, quote, "A cultural renaissance leading to a knowledge-based society is urgently required if the Muslim world is to accept and embrace not only the bricks and mortar of modern research, labs along with the shiny particle accelerators and electron microscopes that they house, but also that spirit of curiosity that drives humankind to try to understand nature, whether it is to marvel at divine creation or just to know how and why things are the way they are." End quote. To me, that would include things like Project Sesame that Al-Khalili mentions. It would also include something like Park 51. This isn't by any means the answer, but I think it is perhaps a more constructive approach and a more constructive paradigm than some alternative proposals that have been aired on YouTube. It is also recognising, and not just in the field of science, that we should not be doing things to Muslims, but with Muslims. I'm Landon Cole. I'll see you next time.